Good morning, friends. Today we're going to talk about a couple of things. One of them is movie selection ideas and how that process is going. And another one is just what I'm learning in school. This is my chance to explain to you what I'm learning so that I show myself that I actually know it. And also, studies actually say that explaining what you learn to other people helps you super cement it. So this is helpful for me and for you. Let's get started. So these last few weeks I have not wanted to do my homework, but there's actually been some really good content in what I'm learning. So we are learning about dialogue and scenes that are packed with dialogue and how to do good dialogue and who has done bad dialogue and how not to do those things. So the two biggest takeaways I have from this dialogue class are, one, that from one person's opinion, there are three types of scenes. And while I don't necessarily agree with this, I've learned a lot about how to drive these three kinds of scenes and how to identify them. And I've learned a lot about myself in trying to analyze these three kinds of scenes in different movies that I've watched. One of the things this professor asks when we analyze scenes is that there are at least 5 exchanges, so that if there are 2 main characters in one scene, they each have to have up to or a minimum of 5 lines of dialogue. I didn't realize that was hard to find until he said, hey, go pick a favorite movie and look for an exchange of 5 lines of dialogue. And my favorite scenes are often more monologues, I guess, where one person is inspiring another or something similar. So that's fun. And the other thing that we're going to talk about is that I learned the difference between show and tell. When people say show, don't tell, I'm going to try to explain exposition to you. Maybe you already know what that is, but it's a thing I'm learning that I hadn't heard of before. Or hadn't been made aware in fun terms of before. So first of all, the 3 types of scenes. According to the person that we're reading up on, the 3 kinds of scenes are a fight, a negotiation, or a seduction. I don't like the word seduction, so that's been fun. Basically, the distinctions are that a fight is when there are 2 opposing sides of an argument. Makes sense. But one party wants to win out over the other and is not willing to, or both parties feel this way, and is not willing to budge. So a fight ends up being that the conversation has been engaged in without consent, that one of the parties has forced this conversation on the other, or this interaction on the other. And a fight is about dominance. So the party that wants to win is trying to gain dominance over the other party in some way. I hate that, but it is easy to identify. At least it's becoming easier to identify with those distinctions about whether or not the parties have engaged in it with consent and who's trying to win over the other without budging. It's an interesting distinction. It's another place that I didn't consider consent being an issue where it totally is. The second type of scene is a negotiation. Now, when you're entering into a negotiation, there is consent. So a negotiation is similar to a fight in that there are 2 opposing opinions, 2 opposing sides of the argument, or desires, 2 opposing, one person wants to see this movie and the other one wants to see this movie, and they have to come to a conclusion. I don't know, that's kind of a weird example, but these 2 people enter into this conversation with consent. They are agreeing to have a conversation about the thing. And they both are willing to budge. So both of them are seeing a little bit of give and take. And that's kind of what defines a negotiation, that they have to come to some sort of accord. So they're, willing to be persuaded, I suppose. The third type is a seduction, and it does not have to be sexual. It just means that that both people enter into a conversation consensually, and that it's basically like one party wants to convince the other party that they're actually on the same side against a problem, and that they have a good solution, and to please engage with them in the solution. So that might, in the similar like movie scenario, if movie theaters were open, might look like a couple going to a movie and getting to the theater, and one party says, I don't know what I want to watch. Like, what sounds entertaining? And, so they've consented to a conversation, and the other person's saying, well, I think this movie sounds really cool. What do you think? And then they're like, I don't know. And they say, this is what happens in the trailer. It looks like it's going to be about this, but I think it's got this actor in it that I really like. And it's persuasion, and it's persuasion in a consenting space. So, interesting distinction there. So that's one of the things I'm learning. We had to watch Get Out, which I don't like scary movies, so that was worth watching, I guess, but I didn't. It was rough. And I watched Captain Marvel to identify some scenes of that, and I watched the first Avengers movie. There are examples of all three of those scenes within the first 20 minutes of the first Avengers movie, so that was fun to see. And then, of course, I've watched The Princess Bride a couple of times for this class, trying to identify different scenes for different things, because that one has great examples of literally everything in filmography. Filmography? Is that a word? Alright, are you ready for number 2? The other thing that I'm learning in school. If you've heard of this before, this might just be a refresher for you. How's that? I have written stories all my life. I've taken several different creative writing classes and always loved telling stories. Think I'm probably in the right industry? Maybe. I mean, we'll see. I mean, if you just consider it the entertainment industry, then I'm probably in the right industry. It just depends on which faction I get into. We shall see. The other thing I'm learning in my dialogue class is about exposition. Exposition is how information is delivered in dialogue. So what I'm learning in the world of exposition is that there are good ways to communicate information via dialogue and bad ways. If you watch a movie, you'll probably be able to tell after I'm giving you these distinctions, because I'm so cool. My class is wonderful. I have become wildly aware of exposition happening in movies. So anytime that you're learning a fact because someone is saying it out loud that is relevant to the plot in some way, that's exposition. So the example that my professor gave was two men standing outside a building, and one of them says, Dave, 20 years old chap, we've known each other. Are you still working in that maintenance facility? That's a terrible example of exposition. That's totally normal in a conversation. You could totally say that to a person if you were a person outside of a movie walking up to a friend and saying, oh my gosh, I haven't seen you in 20 years. It is lackluster in film. He gave the example of the reverse, where the other person, did I call him Dave? I don't remember. Dave walks up to unlock the door and sees Freddy, sure, I don't know, light up a cigarette and says, you've been smoking those things for 20 years. Haven't your lungs given out yet? They tried to get you to quit when we were in school, but that's still not a great example, but there is some added context. So instead of just, I've known you for 20 years, we went to school together, do you still have that maintenance job? It's like one person is shaming the other for a habit that they don't like, or there's the added layer of, well, I guess it's just relationship. There's an added layer of relationship. Okay, I feel like I'm doing a terrible job of explaining this. So I had to, again, choose a movie and use it as an example, find a scene that does exposition wonderfully, and, you know, I want to say choreograph, but that's when you make dance moves up. I had to listen to the scene and then write the whole dialogue, like listen to it and write it, and then analyze what they did well, what they used, how it was covered or not covered. So I chose The Princess Bride because who the hell am I if I don't? And there's a scene in The Princess Bride right after the princess is kidnapped. Spoiler alert, if you haven't watched it, you should watch it. Where Vicini, the short old bald man who is the leader of the trio that kidnaps the princess, tears a symbol off of some fabric and puts it on a horse and smacks the horse and tells it to go. And it starts with Inigo saying, "What is that they're ripping?" And Vicini says something like, "It's the uniform of an army officer of Gilder." And basically the whole scene starts from there, and you see Vicini answer the questions of Inigo and Fezzik, who are against the idea of kidnapping the princess and against the idea of killing her. And Vicini says, "I've hired you to start a war," and makes it like, "This should be obvious. I'm pretty sure I told you when I hired you that I was hiring you to start a war." And they're like, "Oh, I don't know if I like this." So he tells you that it's Florin versus Gilder, that he wants to kill the princess and leave her body somewhere, and that when the enemy finds the body and the torn piece of fabric, they'll have no choice but to assume that it's their enemy across the sea that's the one that killed her, and it'll start a war. But it's delivered in insults, and you also learn where Vicini hired Inigo and where Vicini hired Fezzik. In the scenes where he's basically calling them useless and saying, "I don't need you, I could replace you like this, so do what I'm telling you to do and help me start a war." So there's all of this subtext in this understanding of this scene playing out. Anyway, that's good exposition, because you're not focusing on, "Oh my gosh, he's trying to start a war." You're focusing on, "Oh my gosh, he's being a jerk to these people who just have questions." At least that's what I'm focusing on. I love Inigo Montoya, and I love Fezzik, and Vicini's a jerk. Anyway, that's what I'm learning in school right now. Yeah. What do you think? Does that cover show don't tell? That's basically the example of telling someone information versus communicating it through a scene. That's basically what the show don't tell was getting at. That the audience will, even if you're not a film analysis expert, not that I'm an expert, and you're not noticing specifically, "Oh, that's bad exposition," people hear bad exposition and it breaks immersion. You want to go get popcorn, or now's a good time to go to the bathroom is something that, pops into your head because it's not interesting. It's not engaging. You're not invested in the information that's coming out, and it sometimes feels like the character wouldn't say that. So have you ever watched a TV show or a movie and said, "That character wouldn't say that"? That just doesn't feel like something that character would say. It's probably bad exposition. And the third thing we wanted to talk about today was my movie thing. So last time we talked, I had 3 wonderful options, and all of those options have really good messages, have interesting themes, and have, I think, interesting plots and characters. The problem is, they don't actually have plots yet. I don't know what the plots of those things are, and it's stressing me out. I've also discovered that I was gonna run with the high school student that calls out for Valhalla thing, but I don't know what the plot of a high school life is anymore. I don't know. I think at this point I would like to pair with someone who is closer to their high school age and help them write a movie like that rather than writing it myself. I don't want to misrepresent what high school is like. So, I would rather be in a writer's room to help create that story than write it myself. And I think that's okay. Because I'm in school and I've never written a movie before, I don't think my professors are expecting me to write a perfect story. And I'm far more invested in the content around D&D things and the TV show that I'm writing. So one of the things that I think is going to be more productive and helpful for me in the short term is to write a movie around one of my D&D characters. I'm going to run with the plot that I've already written for her whole backstory, and I'm going to change the ending a little bit, because when you're writing for D&D, you want it to be open-ended of a backstory so that you have something to pursue when you step into the game. But if I'm writing it as a movie, I can give her the dope ending. I think I'm going to write her story, because I basically have the details. I just need to put them in film format and then write it. So the other thing that's fun is this could totally just be a movie that's a precursor, introducing you to this character's backstory, stepping into my TV show. She's one of the main characters in the TV show that I'm writing. So it could be interesting if there's a whole film about everything that she's gone through up until the TV show. Part of the problem is part of me feels like I needed to do exactly perfect world building with this character so that it's not... so that it doesn't break like the rules when I write one later and everyone's like, you wrote this movie, but it doesn't add up to this TV show. That's the end. Those are all my thoughts right now. Thanks for watching. Thank you for showing up for this episode of Olivia's Corner. I hope that you learned something and enjoyed my processing, and I hope that I will see you next week as well. Okay, that's it. Okay, bye. There are examples of commuting. Oh gosh. I need to get more coffee. Let's finish this thought. And he says, "You've been smoking those fuckers for 40 years, or wow, that was bad language. I don't know. That's still not a great example of, excuse me. It is how information is delivered in, excuse me.